So
yeah, no problem. Actually having my extra screen down here so that I don't constantly look over the camera.
that's not a bad choice. I think we're probably live. Let me just quickly.
Yeah, I can see us now.
Yes, perfect. Okay,
With a horrible
so
delay, okay.
sorry?
With quite a delay. That is more
Yes,
confusing than I thought.
there's always a delay actually. So yeah, more than you would expect. But yeah, we're live. So hey everyone, this is again, I keep forgetting the number of the episode. I think it's 15 today. And today we have we're going to kind of switch topic, I think, at least partly because we've been talking a lot about medieval swords, and well, we've talked about Chinese swords as well. But today I think we're going to move more towards early modern era, let's say, or at least Renaissance era, and definitely outside of the German or Italian influence in terms of schools of fencing. So today's guest is Manuel Migone. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, well, that's
Hello,
good.
everyone.
So Manuel, if you want to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, your expertise, and how you kind of got to it. That would be really cool.
Yeah, okay. My background, I started HEMA around 2014, so 11 years ago. Funnily enough, because I was trying to get some horrible fast food, and an ex-apprentice of mine was returning his cat from the vet, and he saw me walking down the street, so he stopped. We started talking, and he told me that he was into historical fencing, and I already knew about historical fencing for several years. And ironically enough, living in Germany, I never found any clubs in Germany because all my sources were from the USA, and I was there, oh, I wish there would be something like that, and suddenly it was there in my city. So I started old school with the longsword and the old Liechtenauer sources, which I still love until this day, and I follow. But then I don't know how long ago, that was like 4 or 5 years ago, a good friend of mine pulled a neat trick, because back in the day, I wasn't really interested in rapiers. I liked long, big and heavy swords, and the bigger, the heavier, the better. And he told me, hey, what do you think about two-handed swords? There's this Montante sword, and also it's like an old Spanish sword. And I was, oh, cool. And also, as I also have not only German, but also Spanish as my native language, I thought there's another source that I can actually read in the original, which always helps, because reading them in the original is already hard enough. And then when you read a translation, it's always like a bit weird. And I've trained as a biologist. I have a diploma in biology. So I always have like this analyzing spirit, and I want to go into it. And the closer I get to the real source, the more I can play with it, the better. And so I thought, hey, that's good. It's actually great, like great sword. It's a bigger sword. Everything is better. It's even on Spanish, and I can maybe even read like the original sources and bring some new spark into it. And we did that like 2 or 3 times before he said, yeah, but you actually have to start with the rapier. And suddenly I was there standing with the rapier and working on destreza. But unlike most other people who are using verdadera destreza, which is like the newer version, I stumbled into I called it the antigua destreza. It's often called the destreza vulgar, which I think is just evil propaganda from the verdadera destreza guys. And I got really stuck there, because Godinho is like the only surviving source for this older style of Spanish rapier fencing. That was for me very, very interesting. And it called me. And there was like this English translation, which I also have and read, that I like very much. But I was thinking, what the fuck am I doing? Why am I reading an English translation if there's a Spanish original that I can read? And then I tried to get the Spanish original for a long time, but it was out of print. Then there came the second edition from Agea Editoria. Shout out to them and many thanks. By the way, this is book 1, which is already falling apart. I bought it a second time to have it nice for the shelf. And so I just thought that it was interesting. First, I'm always a friend of the odd man out, which Godinho is. He falls out completely out of this newer style. And then it was also an interesting view into how like the fencing styles do move and develop over all of Europe through time, which parts stay the same, which change. And when I started, it was more like, oh, this is an interesting technique, and it's interesting to see how this plays out differently. But then I also fell in love with the author, his style of teaching, and also his voice. And well, here I am. People like tend to compare me to like a Jehovah's Witness, because I'm like, have you already heard the good word? Have we talked about Godinho today already? And that's a bit of my stick right now. And I'm working on a German translation of the text, because there's the English one, there's the Spanish one, and I wanted to bring it closer to the growing community of diestros in Germany. So that has been my on and off pet project right now, and that is what I've been working for a couple of years. Sometimes with more enthusiasm and sometimes with less, when life comes in the way of the really important things. And that's
cool. So have you, in your missionary work, have you already been able to convert many people to the to the Godinho school of thought, or are you waiting for the book for that?
Some people. So there are the German Destreza Days. That is like a gathering of all the German diestros. That's mostly verdadera destreza, but I've been a guest speaker there yet now for 3 years in a row, where I am the little voice of Godinho, and bit by bit I get more people into it. I also should mention here Elmar Hohmann from the Hospitalita in Magdeburg, who was doing Godinho just already before me. He also has more like the practical knowledge, who has been a great inspiration and a good friend. Shout out to him. And he was tricked in the same way also by the great sword, by a friend of my friend. I think there was like a big plan in the background. And I also should like mention Jan Gosewinkel, who is like German's expert in two-handed swords, who also has a deep knowledge there. There are some people who have been doing this longer and with more practical approach to it that I should name drop. And then there are, of course, now more and more people that are looking into it, especially because Godinho has like, is a bit of a meme master. He's the one with the pocket sand that everyone keeps telling you about. He's also one of the big Montante sources, and I'm trying to like push more of what his style actually means, what he does, what the difference are to the verdadera destreza, and also something that, for example, had a lot of resonance with the people here in Germany, at least, was that my last talk was about like words that no one can translate, which is a real problem if you are translating a source, because you are already trying to interpret like the words of a master that is trying to show you some kind of movement, which is already hard just put into words. And then you are translating that into another language, and there's no real equivalent. So I had this list of all those words that can go into a fire and die there, because I can't translate them. The translations are like this long, and it's also interesting to see how difficult it is to decide, do I translate them? Do I explain them and then use them in the original? And how far can I go? Because at some point it's not a translation anymore. And there were a lot of people who, for example, wanted also a printout of the untranslatable words into German. And that was, for example, a thing where it slowly is gathering steam. Also, the moment you start to do like the real wild stuff, so the two-handed sword, or the two swords of Godinho, then suddenly people's ear prick up. Because if you say, I'm doing a rapier that is different to la verdadera destreza, they say, oh, nice for you. And how interesting. But there's not so much enthusiasm to like change your entire style if you're already using one, and it's all more like an interesting curiosity. And right now, I'm open. So if people want to know, even if you're not German, oh, there's the camera. Why I'm looking at the microphone. I can help you.
Perfect. So we already have a few comments coming in, just some compliments for you mostly. So here, Mayor's Mate. We also have Cambio Morado. So definitely. And then we have, yes, Pocket Sand for the win.
There it is again.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, it's one of the few things I know about him as well. So it's definitely one of the, and yeah, and then the dual sword, of course. So maybe first to place Godinho in some kind of historical context, then. He writes his treatises from 1599, right? If I remember
Exactly.
correctly. So it's interesting because you almost think it's barely in the 16th century. Its use would be in the 17th century. But as you say, he actually picks up something from uh, styles that are older than the common destrezza,
Mhm.
actually, the verdadera destrezza. So, yeah, how do we place him in this historical context? Let's say, why is he picking up, or why do you think he's picking up these styles and things from a more common style, from an older style, instead of being more open to the new school?
Yeah. Okay, that is a very interesting question, and I like how you are already pouring a bit of gasoline into the or petrol into the possible fire that we could be starting here. The thing is, it appears it's in 1599. That's the date that is in his manuscript. By now, I
Mm-hmm.
think that it's probably not quite finished.
Hmm.
I have the feeling not much so like tangible proof because there's only this one book and the things he says, but the way he puts things, it shows that he is a master who has already a certain standing, who already has experience. And if it's 1599 for one, we can say that he already has learned fencing, he has already mastered it, and he's already been teaching it for quite a while. He is also talking about how, for example, pupils might misbehave, or what you can do as a master to help your pupils to be like upstanding citizens, etc. And this is not like what I would expect from a new master who's like, I don't know, like 30 years old, but it sounds more like an old master who has seen quite a bit of like different things that like mold his opinion. So
Hmm.
1599 is the time that he's writing down his craft, like trying to give it to the rest of the world, both to students and to masters, which makes me think that he learned it in the past, like at least
Hmm.
20, 30 years past. And La Verdadera Destreza at this time, like 1599, so when 1600 starts, Verdadera Destreza is like starting to become like the cool school that is going to replace everything else in Spain, but it's still like in the process, and the older masters that are still there are still using the older styles. So his style is still influenced by the older Spanish style, which has not yet been completely like put into this new system that is
Hmm.
that is already trying to be not only very scientific but also very precise and explaining everything exactly.
Hmm.
So La Verdadera Destreza for me always summons this picture. Well, summoning is a good point because if you see all these circles, it's like they are summoning the demons of fencing. And they try to explain, oh, you have to make this angle really right, or else someone bad will kill you, or this won't be like the real fencing. This won't be
Hmm.
scientific. And what is interesting is Godinho already has like this Renaissance idea that if you watch nature and the perfection of nature and you work with mathematical and analytical tools, you will gain an understanding of this fencing. So he's
Hmm.
standing there on the threshold where he is already an analytical fencer, he's already using the sciences, but he's not yet in the new camp. And probably because he's older, he's not really interested in what all those kids over there are doing, because he's trying to keep his students alive and also like show you his art, his thinking, and how all of this is constructed.
Okay. So, maybe something we should have actually mentioned before is already that this is all happening, of course, within the Spanish school of fencing, which is already a subset of its own. So, what are the main differences in general between, let's say, Spanish school, whether it's the verdadera destreza or the Godinho style, like the older style, compared to what you would see, let's say, in German or Italian schools?
Not sure about the German schools because I only know the longsword parts there.
Yeah.
The Italian schools, interestingly enough, Godinho seems to have certain similarities to the Italian schools. But the Italian schools have a different feeling. I'm not an expert on that, but for example, I studied a bit of Capoferro, and Capoferro is like in his faraway stance. He's looking at you on his one line, and when you enter that line, then death comes. While Godinho is constantly trying to place himself in the best possible position, which again, you see that also in the verdadera destreza, where you have like this circle, where you circle around your enemy to try to break his vectors of attack. Godinho is very much focused on security and then striking. So security comes very much first, then the strike, and it's still something that is, you have to understand the principles. While with the Italians, and now I'm not an expert on the Italian styles, so I have the impression that the Italian styles are very focused on the enemy and the attack and getting it done. While the Spanish styles seem to be a bit more hesitant and a bit more quite literally dancing around your opponent before striking. And Godinho is somewhere there in the middle, because when he is being aggressive while cautious, he wants to go the shortest way. He wants to put the punta or the atajo or revés into the enemy and like disappear again. And what he does is a lot of like shifting the weight forward or backward to like get the measure into exactly the position that gets your attack done and gets you out of the way and secures you, which to me feels a bit more Italian. But at the same time, he has this movement and these strategies that look a lot more like what than the Spanish school would make. So he also goes more into contact. He also blocks the blade. There's a feeling in the blade, and he uses that for his maneuvering and for his strategy that often is also like in several steps, which is also interesting, because when you read his book, the first 13 chapters tell of a different style than the rest of the book. He starts it out as a very simple one. There comes an attack, you block it, and at the same time you make a counter attack, and with that you can like destroy your enemy, which again feels a bit like more like the Italian. There comes an attack, you stop the attack, and within that one tempo you just make your counter and get out of there, and there it is. And starting with chapter 14, he begins to make everything more complicated, because now he says you are in this situation, you have made contact with the blades are in contact, and now your enemy has like this 5 or 6, 7 options. And now I'm going to explain to you very exactly and confusingly, I say that as a translator, what the 7 counters to that is, and while I'm at it, how can you counter the counter?
Yeah.
And then it becomes like this very complex play-by-play interconnected, like a decision tree that becomes ever more complicated within one chapter, where he tells a lot, and that to me feels much more like the Spanish one.
It almost feels then as if well, just because he's the one we have the treatise from, but let's say he may be the starter then of a Spanish style in a sense, because he feels like, well, not in terms of date of publication, but let's say in terms of being that bridge between older, maybe not yet Spanish defined style, and instead something that becomes then but I think I can say this because I'm ignorant, so on the matter, so I can speculate a little more freely without. But from the way you're describing it, yeah, it does seem like the thing is, though, he is the only person of which we have a treatise in this pre-destreza style, right? Do we know of anyone else that was writing, like, were there multiple schools or things, or?
There would have been multiple schools. He's the one that we actually know of. I think by now that a couple of other manuscripts, which also seem to be like bridging manuscripts, have appeared, but there I would have to go deeper. And before I tell you something that is completely wrong, I will say that maybe, but for a long time, he was like the one that was before the others, even if he was technically speaking at the same time when Verdadera Destreza was already rising. He was like one example. Also, that we have just this one book that is in the Library of Lisbon also tells us that maybe there are other books, other masters. He doesn't seem to have been that important, because then we would know more of him. We would have citations of him, that we have like the luck of having a very good master, but a local one. As a biologist, I fall, of course, into the pattern recognition that I would have from my science, and I would say that he's like kind of a bridging step in the evolution of the Spanish style, where you can already see many of the markers, many of the improvements, and many of the styles that influence La Verdadera Destreza, what you see there, because they are obviously related, but at the same time, he still has like roots to the back. I don't think that he's like the last of the ancient masters, even if that sounds really cool. However, that he's a representative of this time where things started to change. And in a way, he also shows us another way where the Spanish style might have gone to, if he was, for example, more influential, or if Pacheco, for example, had been less so.
Or if he had been maybe based in a more central area of Spain, because he is Portuguese, right?
He's Portuguese, but he was working in Spain. At least it seems that way. His book is written in a very interesting Spanish, where every once in a while there's like a Portuguese word there, or he writes a Spanish word, but in the Portuguese style, which is pretty interesting. And yes, I think that one of the things that shows us that he's not that important, in inverted commas, is that he's just one master. Also, looking at the time itself, the most influential, of course, would be the Grand Master that is just directly under the king, who is the one who has like the influence to actually declare other people as masters. There are also some interesting works here. Of course, now I don't remember the name of the book, but I can like put that into the notes later. That is mostly a look at what happened with the fencing with the longer swords, the longsword, and later with the Montante from 1500 to 1700. And there you can also see, for example, how there is like this concept of mastership, where you go to the king's master, he watches you, and you show him which weapons you are proficient with, and if he likes what he sees, you are declared a master and can teach others. And like this grandmaster also had like deputies who could, very interesting by the way, he had deputies that he could, for example, send into the New World. For example, Destreza was already, for example, in Latin America, that back then was still part of the Spanish Empire, because the grandmaster had, for example, deputies over there. So that we can already see that there were many masters back then, all with their own schools, with their own styles, that had to pass like through this examination by the royal employees. It was very interesting on a bureaucratic level, because we imagine this kind of bureaucracy where you have to show your skills and then pass several tests, like something more modern. But like 500 years ago, you already had like these structures. So there I would put him as a really good and really competent master, but not someone that was really renowned or known outside of his place of work, because we already have we so far have nothing much to say about him but what we find in his one book.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. We don't know much about his life or his we don't have like anecdotes, people mentioning him in other books or stuff, or I mean, as a person, not as his techniques. The thing.
Yeah, well, we don't have external sources as far as I know. However, it is interesting to see that his book is full of little anecdotes and little explanations that paint a grander picture about him, that gives us a really interesting insight into not only his thinking, but also a kind of his background. Because it's not only teaching you how to fence, it is also explaining to you how you should be in character as a fencer, both as a student of the fencing arts, as someone who is a fencer himself or herself, and as a master who teaches. And he also explains the background of why he thinks that it should be that way. There are like appendices in his book, where he does explain certain things. And one is very interesting because there, when I started to learn about Godinho, he was called like the fencing master that allows you to do everything naturally, and you just do things and then you poke people and throw sand in their eyes and that's it. And it sounded more like what you would imagine under vulgar fencing. There's this guy, it's more like a street fighter and you can do it in your style. That's not true. He was actually very much someone who had a system, and there is an academic background. I'm pretty sure there. Not sure if he was like an academic, but he had a high level of education. I'm going to return to that appendix soon, and it might actually either be cultural or he was an army man, because one of his many examples is he always like likens how you act with how the military would do that, how an officer would do something, how a troop would do something behind enemy lines. So there's like this one thing that kind of shows you that he at least had an understanding of military tradition and actions, especially when it came, for example, for left-handed people, which I am. Oh, that's another PS for later, maybe. He said that in the military, they tend to show the left-handed people how to fight with the right. And he thought that was kind of dumb, because you are wasting time in showing someone how to do something less efficient than using what already is their strong suit. And again, this seems to be something that comes from a military background. And for his educational level, there's this one thing where he brings out an anecdote about Diogenes, the philosopher who went to the Olympic Games back in ancient Greece. So he's already citing ancient Greece, and he's showing who's got education. I do, because I know Diogenes, and now I'm citing the Greeks, which in the times of the Renaissance, this is like a typical thing that you would do to show that you're a man of culture. And that was to find out who is the fastest runner in this anecdote. And there were people running the 100 meters or something like that. And Diogenes came and said, can I also take part in this contest? And they said, yeah, of course you can, but what will you do? You're a philosopher and also old and slow. And he said, I'm not running. My horse here is running. And his horse was much faster than any human. And he said, he won the race. He's the fastest runner. He should get the gold medal. And then Godinho goes over to say, if we think just about our physical abilities, like speed or courage or just raw brawn, that's all bullshit. Because if we compare us with nature, you will always find animals that are faster than us, that are more courageous than us, that are much stronger than us. So just thinking in like this base level is dumb. That what makes us really cool is our wits and our strategy. That is what makes us good. And he then connects it to the art of fencing, that in the end, it's not your power or your swiftness that is the end of all to be. It's good to have that and to cultivate that, but to know that there are limits, and that what made the human, and there's again this interesting Renaissance idea, what made the human the master of the world, as they thought back then, is that we can analyze, we can think, we can strategize, and then use that. So he had the Greeks, he had an anecdote about Diogenes, and then he made this entire thing about how this relates to fencing, and that fencing is a science that you have to understand. And if you understand like these basic fundamentals of what makes fencing work, and then you can use them by using your mind, then you will become a really great fencer. And he then, like, again, this is connects us a lot to the people of the past. I think he starts complaining a lot about all these dumb people around him, because oh, you have great titles and you gave up a lot of money and you have a really blingy sword. These are not real fencers. They are like people who are courageous and have like good attitudes and a great strategy, and that these people are the actual people that you should look up to, and not to this weird master over there who shows you like basic training, and then you have like to pay him like 2 pieces of gold more to show you the secret teachings. So you can see a lot about how he thought about teaching, how he thought about fighting, and also about his background as a person, even if there is not much, well, no, there is nothing around him that talks about him. But the way he talks, the way he presents his arguments, the way he constructs that, and the way he puts it into reality gives us a great background. And from there, bit by bit, and this is something that utterly fascinates me, as you can see, like brings up this, the whole of Godinho, or brings us closer to it. There's also very at the beginning of the book a bit that I also found very telling, is when he said that there are like other masters who tell you that it's worth to get cut if you can like poke your opponent, because running someone through with a rapier is extra deadly, which is true because there are in our torso all our favorite organs. But he said that that was a really stupid idea, because in his time he has seen the same number of people die of cuts than of being run through with a sword, which again to me is very interesting, because this is someone who obviously has this experience, and he's very adamant in many different points that you as a fencer have to be safe first and never sorry. It's always better to go out unscathed, even if your enemy lives, because your life is more important. Also, that it's better not to score than to be wounded oneself. So again, this slowly like builds up a person, despite despite this being only a book about technique.
Yeah, you're bringing up a lot of really interesting points. We even have an interesting comment here, which may open another can of worms. So let's go with that first, and then I'll mention my question.
Let's open a can of worms.
Yeah, well, actually, first we have David saying, "Hey, Manuel." So, hey, David.
Hi, David.
Then we have Elmar Homan saying, if Pacheco burnt all the other Antigua-style books, it's no surprise. Still referring to when we were talking about why there's only Godinho left, I think. So all other known old-style masters only known because Pacheco mentioned them. So do you think there was a willing destruction of an older or more diverse variety of teachings, or did they just disappear due to time and neglect?
I think I'm on Elmar's side here. By the way, one of the other greats of Godinho in Germany.
Hi, Elmar.
There is something very suspicious about Pacheco and how Verdadera Destreza became the dominant style, because Pacheco was made the King's Royal Examiner. The King's Royal Examiner can decide what is proper fencing and what isn't. And if you have that position and believe really, really, really strongly that your style is the only real style, this will destroy every other style. Also, the propaganda actually worked, because when I started with this, I thought that Godinho's vulgar style was just vulgar, like more like half decent street fighting, or someone who punched a lot of people in the streets and used like dirty tricks, another thing for which he is well known, and used those dirty tricks to win a fight instead of having a style. But then, having read the book and seeing how it is constructed, how he actually conducts the way he's doing that, it certainly shows that Pacheco had a big impact, and he actually probably destroyed all the other schools. So if you want to go more Star Wars, into a more Star Wars direction, as Pacheco was the emperor.
It does make sense, even if comparing to the way you described the environment. So very centralized, very relying on like royal approval to be able to teach. This kind of definitely lays the ground for someone to just be able, in the same way as you can approve things, you can make them disappear if you need to. So it's nice to hear, yeah, that the idea of vulgar Esgrima was is debunked, let's say, or that it wasn't necessarily just street fighting that evolved into something more fancy, but that, yeah, these refined concepts existed already previously. I was thinking now, as you were talking, in the Destrezza, we have a lot of, when you talk about like philosophical concepts and like the Renaissance kind of vibe, and there's a lot of apparently, well, desire for symbolism, for like geometrical propriety, I guess, but also a lot of Aristotelian philosophy is imbued into it. But it's interesting that in Godinho, we seem to have instead Diogenes, which is the very opposite of the order of Aristotelian kind of. So I wonder if there's even like yeah, it's almost not only two different fencing schools, but almost like they take from two different philosophical starting points in a sense, which sounds interesting to me.
That's a really good point. I never thought about. Thank you very much for this idea. The inception has already worked, and I'm already like developing many theories here. It is very interesting, and I hadn't really considered it, but now that you mention it, it does make sense, because Verdadera Destreza is incredibly strict. There are a lot of things that you have to do in a very specific way, and even the people, because that also is very interesting, is that there's the Verdadera Destreza. Within Verdadera Destreza, there are several masters, and one of the most popular insult was to say, but he is not quite as verdadero as we are. He seems a bit vulgar. He's doing things differently. But even there, you will see that instead of like going more with understanding and feeling, I will come back to that in a second, they have like this very strict rules. There's, for example, Rada from Mexico, who like wrote like 3 books with more than 1,000 pages, and he has like, for certain moves, he has like 36 variations of this one move and what to do when, where, and why. Which makes it very convoluted, very complex, and there are many details that you have to follow, almost like you're following a program, like a computer program, that there's like a logic behind it, and if you use this strict logic, you will get a result that is perfect. While Godinho also uses like this logic, but he is more on the side of, you have to understand the shit that you're talking about. If you just follow, there's another like a little footnote, is that if you just follow the rules one after another, then your play is mechanical, and that the real art and science lies in understanding why you are doing that. And there are some differences, and there we are, because Diogenes also would say that whenever you put up a very strict rule, I'm going to put a chicken on your desk without feathers and tell you there's a man, and tell you that when you are too encumbered by the rules, you become silly yourself, because every rule will open a new like open portal where there's something weak or something that doesn't quite work, while there was more like this think for yourself, try to understand nature, try to understand it, don't be so serious about it, like take the art seriously, take the thinking seriously, but don't take yourself too seriously, because you need to like have a feeling for where you're now my English is going away, where the limits of your thinking are, the limits of your knowledge, the limits of your understanding. And when you work with what you have and build on your own understanding, that will actually open your mind and make you wiser than just following this step by step. And in this case, yes, I would say that Godinho's style is like a polar opposite, although it's building on the same like basics of the scientific thought of the Renaissance that we have here. There's an interesting example that is one of my untranslatable words. There's the so-called compás, that in La Verdadera Destreza is just a step. And if you are supposed to do a specific step, this compás step has a name. So there's one step like that's a bit diagonal, one is backwards, one is directly towards, and they all are named, and it's just one step. Godinho also uses the word compás, but he uses it completely differently. For him, the compás is the step that you do, and now it becomes complicated, and that's why this is one of the words that make me pull out my hair a lot. You position yourself in a way that is optimal when you take into account how your enemy is positioned towards you, what his position is, what how he is looking towards you, and how he is focusing on you. So you have to understand at the beginning a lot more, and it's a very complex thing, because it's like do it right, which is almost not enough of an explanation. And he trains you like to understand that the compás always brings you into this perfect combat distance, and where you are positioned in the best way possible. This is also strengthened by later he's saying that the compás, when you are in combat, gets lost every time, especially if it's heated in real combat, and that only with a lot of experience, when you become a professional, you become able to re-establish the compás more and more. And that is like one of the bigger skills. And here you have it. It's both more or less the same, because both have this goal of positioning you exactly where you need to be, where you have a weak opponent and you are strong yourself and can act against them, and also have a good way out of that where you are secure. But the one has like all these circles and lines and special names, and the other one just tells you about the principle, what is behind it, and what you have to do to like do it right. And then it becomes your problem. Then it's your understanding and your knowledge and your training that you should be doing that will help you get this right once you have understood what the principle is. By the way, this is also one of the things that I noticed during my translation. This is a big difference between my translation and the English one. In English, you have compás translated as step. And in mine, after a lot of deliberation and hair pulling, I thought I will not translate this word. I will use it as it is, because it is a completely different thing. He also uses it for like compact things that you, for example, with a two-handed sword with the Montante, there is like, if there are like 4 enemies in front of you and you are in a street that's not too broad, you do this one compás, and one compás is like a complete idea. That is a step how you throw your sword, how you retreat out of it. It's like this is more like a computer program where where he tells you this one compass. But with the compass itself, he also tells you this is not only a rule that you follow mechanically to hit the people, but keep in mind how far away they are, how far you have to go, and what you need to do to keep this going. So there again, we have like these opposed concepts. Despite looking from the outside, they are doing things similar-ish.
Yeah. So before we move into the next couple of comments that are coming in, I just wanted to, going back still to what you were talking about before, what struck me as really interesting is the fact that there were suicide fencers, even in a time, we tend to think about it today as a byproduct of better protection and sportification of fencing. And we think, oh, okay, in an environment where double hits count, suicide fencing makes more sense. But apparently they were doing it even when you could actually get cut or poked. Do you see that? Is this a big problem in Godinho? Is it something that he mentions a lot, or is it just something he mentions like in passing? Or do you get the impression that people were prone to hurting themselves in order to strike a hit?
I think it's there in the background radiation of what he tells you. Because he's not saying, oh, people are dying left and right because they are such idiots. He is telling you that if you are going to be an idiot, you will get cut. There's like this famous line in the first chapter of his Montante chapter where he said, you know, there are these rules which we use to use the Montante, and they are here for a reason. And if you want to break these rules, you better be a master, because I have seen a dude who was fighting with his Montante against one with a dagger and a rapier. And the Montantero broke the rapier, and then the dude with the dagger, because he understood the principles of fencing better, went along and murdered the guy with the Montante. So, we are in a time that's also really interesting. You can see that also in other sources. Here we are in a time where people duel for fun. They actually also use protective gear, which leads to other fun stories. But these are really dangerous weapons, and people will get killed and murdered. And that has always been a problem when you had like swords, pistols, etc. When people get angry, they tend to kill each other, and then you try to like bring in laws to keep that under control, and people find ways around it. And as you already said, the kamikaze fencer has always existed. I think, yes, protection helps us a lot, because that brings it out. It brings out our greed, which when I'm working as a trainer, I say we have like 3 big enemies. The first is fear when you start, then it's anger, and the last one is greed. And anger and greed, for example, when you are angry, you don't think, you just hit. And when you are greedy, you don't care about your own safety. You care more about getting the other one. And if you're really angry, or if you really overestimate your skills, you will attack another person in a way that's not safe for you, but it will kill the other one. So I think this has always been a problem. And you see it again in Godinho, because he often underlines how important it is to stay and remain safe and secure. He has an entire chapter about this idea of security and how incredibly dangerous it is just to get a single cut, which usually, and there seemed to have schools back then that said that exchanging a cut for a thrust is perfectly okay. And he said, no, that's not perfectly okay. The only thing that's okay is not getting hit at all. It also shows, in a way, in his unfair chapters, where he shows you all the dirtiest tricks that you could think of. Because in the other part of the book, he's really honorable. And he's really trying to show you have to be an ethical person, you have to be a good person, and you have to use the sword with integrity and respect for what it is. And this is an art form. This is not for slaughter. Actually, I should not be teaching anyone the sword, because I'm unmarried. And from Godinho's perspective, unmarried men are like the worst. You can teach them to fence, but you cannot make them masters, because they have not settled down. What's wrong with them? And in the chapters where he shows you how to cheat your way out of a situation, it's to save your life.
Yeah.
It's more important to stay alive than to be a good sport and getting run through by people who just ambushed you or who are following you and trying to murder you, even if the way he puts it is sometimes really funny.
This is interesting because my experience is very little and mostly on research I've done in the past week or two preparing for this call. But isn't also one of the points in the verdadera destreza that the kill isn't necessarily the main goal? So there's even a difference there in the kind of approach to fencing in a sense. Like it seems to me like Godinho, yes, it's nice to be honorable, but in the end, people die. Whereas in the verdadera destreza, well, I was reading somewhere it's because of like Christian influence on so let's say the preservation of life is really important. So as long as you can disarm someone, that would be the actual optimal goal. So it's interesting to see that difference as well, I think. We have a couple of questions. So before we keep going, so one by
I can also
Sunfire.
talk about like these duels and how this Destreza tries not to do too much harm to later, but first the questions.
Yes. Okay. Let's keep a pin in that. So if I forget, maybe someone remind me in the comments if we both forget about this point. But yeah, let's get to the question here. So do you think Godinho's style of teaching makes it more approachable for a modern fencer?
Yes and no. No, because his book is a bit of a problem when you are working with it the first time. So when I'm translating it, that's what makes it horribly hard, and why I'm still not finished yet is you really have to work through to get what he's actually meaning to do. But on the other hand, there is a very intricate and very clever marketing ploy behind it. He like makes it in a way that is accessible and builds upon certain things, and then step by step, like more or less he tricks you into doing the hard and dumb work. At one point he also says that you as a fencer should think yourself as like a kind of an actor who also has to practice a lot behind the scenes before he goes outside and shows his art to the others. And you can see in this comment that people, even back then, were obviously not doing enough footwork. You know who you are. And that's a really interesting point. Because as I said, the first 13 chapters were pretty nice and interesting. And they give you this feeling from, damn, I can do that too. Because chapter 1, the 3 rules of fencing. It feels like a modern TikTok thing. Hey, do you want to be a cool fencer? I can show you with these 3 simple rules how you can be the perfect fencer and never lose a match. The third one will surprise you. And it's rule number 1 is just blocking. And not just blocking, but countering. When someone attacks you from the right, you like get the attack here on the strong of your sword and with the quillen. And while he's doing that, you already are pointing or thrusting with your point into his or her face. If they are not trying to hit your face, you will try to hit them there where you are going to be hit, which is, by the way, one of the best advice I have seen, because for a long time, when people are of a different height, when someone attacks that is larger than you, tries to attack your knees, and you try to like block it with a normal cut, it won't block it. He tells you the one when your opponent is pointing at your knees, you point at their knees too. If they're pointing at your head, you point at their head. This changes how you position your own sword, because with a larger person, the knees won't be like in a 45-degree angle, they will be higher. And with that, he gives you like a way to block the attacks and give an instant counter. So he does it to the left, he does it to the right, and then he tells you where your opponent is aiming, that's where you are aiming too. And the second rule is, for all your attacks, you do it exactly the same with the 3 rules. You are always covered. You look where your enemy is pointing at, and then you go into there and attack. So like there's like these, it's so super simple. And if you try that out with your friends, you can, or in your club, it instantly works. It feels very cool, and you feel like, wow, I'm like Superman, I'm invincible. If you then go out and try it with the real diestro who has done verdadera destreza and has a lot of experience, you will really quickly discover that it doesn't work that well. But inside of the school, you get a sword, you get to fight, and it instantly works. And the following chapters, the ones that I call the marketing chapters, that they are like the white belt part. They are all really interesting and easy, and he puts it into like situations that are a bit cinematic. Like rule 3 or 4 is how to draw your sword and how to get close to your enemy to be secure in this one position, establishing the compass where you can start fencing. And he begins it with this little anecdote that, yeah, you're there in the street, you're in a shouting match with some other guy, and at one point you reach the end of your words, which is a great expression, and then swords are drawn, and I will tell you how to draw your sword and how you will be perfectly safe. And in there's positioning of your hand, of your body, how you do your steps forwards and backwards, and it's actually basic footwork with the sword. But you, in your mind, they are like these dudes, and they just said things about the vegetable nature of my mother. I'm going to show them. My mother is at least a fungus. And there you have like this cool little ideas and situations, and that give you an idea of what is actually happening out there. You will also see that later, for example, in the Montante chapter, where he tells you, oh, like you are on a galley, they are like transporting prisoners from here to there, and you have like, I don't know, the plans for the Death Star, or something like that. And now pirates are attacking you from both sides. It's again really exciting. And then how you can like poke with your Montante to the left, how you can poke with your Montante to the right. And again, it seems really exciting, and you can already see you fighting pirates, and it's really cool. But in reality, what he is doing is you're standing there with your Montante, and you are just learning how to move it left and right, and how to make a proper poke to the left and an attack to the right. And it's like, you don't need to move much. You're just getting to know the weapon, its weight, how you are supposed to move, how your body mechanics are used. And when you do that, like in this very small and narrow compartment, you get into a street that's a bit broader. And again, he gives you a situation where there are bad guys and you're kind of a hero. And now you can move your Montante a bit freer and let it flow. And so I can see that in that way, if you read Godinho with that in mind, that he's not only teaching you a system, but also a teaching system. And you can, like, if you use it for a couple of times and you follow his instructions, you will see that he's building step on step on step on each other, so that you can get, especially at the beginning, all of your students into the situation, into the movement, and have them repeat that as long as necessary, so that they have the footwork down, they understand the measure and how to move the sword, before then in chapter 14 suddenly completely changing everything. That's when I was translating. The first 13 chapters were hard, and then chapter 14 smacked me in the face with complexity. Because now that I have done all this cool stuff, there's just an opponent there, and he's trying to kill me in 7 different ways when we have sword contact. And now he's telling me exactly which specific point I am and what I have to do to survive it, or if I am in that situation, what I need to do this attack and what I have to keep in mind to be safe. So there's like, suddenly there's like this uplift, and now you are more on a professional level. So yes, I would think that if you get what Godinho is doing, that you already have something that is very approachable for the modern fencer, because in certain ways this is a very modern way of teaching, which again shows us that humanity in the last 500 of years has made great steps forward in the technology, but we are still pretty much the same as people.
Yeah, definitely. Very cool. We then have a comment here by Elmar again. So a little hint, Pacheco also rants about the Dutch merchant Thibaut, who is nowadays considered as a LVD master, but has clearly some hallmark pieces that are more like Godinho, for example, cross-guard position. So, yeah, what's
okay?
What are your thoughts on this?
Let's take it from the hidden master, the king in shadows here. Wait a second, I have to stop my TV from going off. Yes, that is also true. We have, for example, Thibaut, who uses certain ways of handling the sword that are not like true verdadera destreza, which already brings him into trouble with Pacheco, because Thibaut sometimes holds his sword in a more horizontal position. And for example, Godinho says that if you are blocking an attack that's coming from this side, if I'm right-handed from my right, I will block it with my nails down. And then my cross guard will be more or less parallel to the ground, or maybe a bit like inclined. But this is not something that verdadera destreza people would ever do. And the other side too, that your nails are pointing up, and again your cross guard is more like parallel to the ground, like a horizon. And this is not something that verdadera destreza usually does. They usually have a more angled or direct approach where the cross guard shows up and down, or like this. And yes, you can see that with Thibaut too, who learned probably in Spain, and there you need to ask someone who knows about Thibaut. But yeah, he's already getting into hot water for holding his sword in the wrong way. That's not verdadero. That's not true.
Okay, then we have another comment here by David. I suppose in an era where you could die of a small cut, turning septic, stressing the importance of not getting cut makes sense. Yeah, this actually surprised me too when you mentioned that some teachers seem to consider it a acceptable risk. Yeah, you can't disinfect that cut. You're exposing yourself to serious.
If you could, they probably would not have thought of disinfection, because that wasn't a thing back then, as far as I know. And again, you're gambling. For example, if they cut through your clothes, you don't know what's on the sword, what's on the dust on your clothes, what's in the clothes yourself, what's on your skin, and all of that will get into the wound. Usually, if you get cut, it will bleed profusely, which will be a great help for you because it will wash everything out, but it's still a risk. And I find it very interesting that Godinho says, because even when talking to people today, and I say, hey, Godinho said that, people say, yeah, but a cut is not as bad. Is it really? And
yeah,
the
also,
way he obviously saw enough people die of that. And sepsis would be a very good point.
Yeah, and I mean, also a cut. Modern day cut, like with your kitchen knife, is maybe not a big deal. Getting cut through the chest with a sword, I would consider it a pretty bad outcome, definitely. Yeah, or even on your arm.
With this kitchen knife by accident, it's still a deal.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I mean, you can sever a ligament or something or a tendon pretty easily.
Also,
okay.
For me, the kitchen knife is actually a good teacher, because I have certain discussions with other fencing friends who say, blah, this is just a little cut. But when I remember that one time that my knife wasn't as sharp as it used to be, and I slid off a tomato and into my hand, that was just like a little hit. It was not with much movement, and that was very unpleasant and very bloody. And when I now imagine, that's also something that helps me when training. When I feel the slide of a sword, I try to imagine how cool would I have found that if that was a sharp kitchen knife or a half-sharp kitchen knife, because that also gives you a bit of like an idea of that. Maybe even if I've survived that and I can still go on fighting, I would not like that wound.
Yeah, and speaking of that, have you seen the video from a few days ago, that tournament in Poznan, I think it was, where the guy got stabbed through the jacket with a rapier? Yeah, so there's he's okay. It got him on the arm, and it
How?
went. Yeah, they were using. I haven't followed too well, but apparently they didn't have like tips on the. Yeah, it was blunt, but not really blunt. Well, not
Mm.
enough at least. And the blade was really stiff, so it went through the jacket, and it went in the arm by a couple of inches. So that is something that, like in a movie or in general, think you, oh yeah, that's minor. But the guy was posted later about his injury, and it had all kinds of bigger consequences on the muscle, on damage to tissue, and everything, which is actually very surprising because that is a little puncture on the arm. Oh yeah, that will just keep going. And it's like, no, that's not always the case. Yeah. So
Yeah, that's true. And also, the moment you go deeper into the tissue, there is a wide range between you are lucky and you aren't, where a little stab can be bad. You will have to go to the hospital anyway. It will have to be disinfected. It will have to be sewn together. But there's a lot of stuff there. There are arteries, there are veins, there's connective tissue. There are so much things that it could ruin. And even if your arm still works, it maybe won't work as it did before. And seeing it going even through a jacket, which is supposed to stop that, with a blunt sword, that's bad. Also, again, going back into the past, this deeper stab is also really, really bad, because if that one gets infected, you're dead.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was interesting reading. We're going a little off topic now, but some of the comments on this incident actually were mentioning a few of the things we talked about now. So it's like apparently they both lunged into each other, like this. Plus, of course, using maybe 350 rather than 800 jacket. But then even there's the issue that if they, yeah, so there's a lot of interesting debates on the matter. But yeah, luckily the guy's okay. So, so that's good
good.
news. Yeah. But yeah, we still have another comment by Mayor's Mate. Mayor's Mate asked Manuel about the rules of sword carrying at the time. So I'll take advantage of this because this is actually a topic I'm quite interested in. So,
okay,
what are the rules?
I'm already going into your grandpa tells you a little story around the campfire story. The interesting part is that back then, when Godinho was alive, carrying arms was allowed to a certain extent. And again, you can see how much our modern mind of today is pretty much like the mind back then, because again, the biologist comes through. Biologically speaking, there's pretty much no difference between us now and them. Like 500 years, that's nothing. So there are laws, a lot of laws that are considered about protection and security. This is, for example, why the Spanish king said that rapiers only can have a certain length, and everything above that is like ridiculous and you shouldn't do that. Why it's, for example, forbidden if you have a sheath. What some people did is like cut off the last bit of the sheath and blacken their swords, so that you couldn't see the tip and it looked like it was sheathed. And so if someone went there, you could use your sheathed sword and stab them. And that, for example, was very illegal, but you were allowed as a Spanish gentleman to carry your sword for self-protection and your dagger, because that's what the minimum is for a free citizen. You were not supposed to go around murdering people with that. Also, everything above that was already forbidden. Slight detour, there was one exception, and we will see that there's a certain group of people that have been trouble for a long time in our cultures. There was one kind of people that weren't allowed to wear a rapier or carry a rapier, and thus were students. Young men with more temperament than sense, that went so far that they could, in many places, like at least carry their dagger, but not their rapiers. They could have them, and they could have them at home, but they couldn't go outside with them. That was forbidden because we all know how students are. And then there was, for example, a strict regulation, and so that it went so far that even taking away that. However, at the same time, you see complaints. Again, old people are all the same. There was someone who was commenting on the laws, because let's get back to what was forbidden. Everything else, carrying a rondel, a big shield, even the smaller shield, the buckler, was forbidden. These are weapons of war. The same goes for the Montante. That is a weapon of war. Carrying 2 rapiers, war again. So all the double weapons were considered war weapons. Shields were considered war weapons. It's exactly the same like today, that you might, as a hunter, carry like a normal rifle. But the moment you want to have an assault rifle, they say, what are you going to do with that deer, dude? That looks suspicious. So at the same time, back to the commentary, there was, because there was this commenter on the judicial state of the day, and he explained these rules, why students were forbidden. And then he told you, yeah, but when you walk through the city at night, you suddenly see people like in military cosplay. He saw a student, like he was wearing mail, he was wearing armor, he had like a helmet on, he had a shield, he had a rapier, a dagger, and a montante. And he was shocked to see that. And then, but it appeared that he wasn't looking for any kind of trouble. He was just hanging around there with his friends, talking and laughing. What is the world coming to? Or on another occasion where there was again a student with a montante showing off his montante skills in broad daylight, I have to add. I'm channeling my old man again. In broad daylight, they were showing off their skills while their friends were around them, cheering them on and applauding with a weapon of war. You have to think about that. So this is really interesting. So this shows us a lot about, again, the rules of the time and how the people used that. And also for the Batman fans out there in the audience, there were at least 2 Batman-esque figures. One was in Peru, interestingly, in Lima. The other one was somewhere in the southern Spain. Both were priests at day. Normal, God-fearing, like especially God-fearing people. They were clerics. So they believed in the one true God and mercy, hopefully, but they also believed that sword fighting was really awesome. And they had like, both of them had like full military armor that they got from somewhere. And then in the nights, they went out roaming the streets to find people to duel so that they could be really cool motherfuckers. I'm sorry about that word, but that like captures it. And then they were gotten by the local authorities, and they got all their weapons removed, and they got like really high penalties that they had to pay. It's a bit hard to say how much the money was worth back then. I have, thanks to a Don Quixote de la Mancha book, one table that helps me that back then how much a chicken cost. And so if I take a today chicken and then I can like say, oh, those were like 10 to 20,000 euros that you had to pay.
Whoa.
If you were caught with war weapons and you were forbidden to use them again. They were taken away from you and then they were put away. And it seems that like, and this is like really, really rough ballpark estimations, that a sharp, simple like Montante would have cost you between 2,000 and 3,000 euros, or a lot of chicken.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, the law and the way that the people behaved around it is very interesting.
Yeah, and that distinction between war weapon and something that is a symbol of status is, yeah, it's very, it's something that Niccolò mentioned as well, Menotti from the Spadone project, when he was talking about also his research into laws and everything, that there was, yeah, basically zero tolerance for war. Like, certain weapons, when you're going around on the street with them, is because you mean trouble. It's not because you're looking cool. It's not because it's a sign of your nobility or whatever. It's because, so those were not tolerated, generally speaking, which is, understandable, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
In terms of, I think we've seen a lot now in the context of Godinho's work. I'm thinking now in terms of the content itself. How is it divided? Which one is the main weapon or the main weapons? And does he balance things off pretty well, or do you have the feeling that he had a strong preference for something?
I would say that the Rapier alone was like the main weapon of choice. That is what you learned first, because, well, it was the weapon of choice at the time. If you were a gentleman or wanted to be one, or if you wanted to protect yourself, that was the weapon that you had. You had your Rapier, that was the main one. And also, if you just look at the sheer volume, he starts with his 13 easy chapters, which are then followed by 161 not so easy chapters. So you have a total of 174 chapters that's only showing you how to fence with the Rapier in all matter of situations. So you master it, you master attacks from one side, from the other side, and thrusts, and then that's also very interesting, different type of opponents that you could run into. And then after all that is done, he starts with the doubled weapons. Now I'm not sure how that was, but I think that they built on each other. Maybe sword and dagger was first, or maybe sword and buckler, which he, by the way, like put close together, because he said that these are similar enough to think of, because the buckler in your hand has certain similarities that the dagger has and how to use them. Then he had sword and cape, which is always comes in handy. Double swords. This one makes him different, because there are not so many examples of double swords, and his dual swords are very interesting, because if you look at other schools, often they are used as a kind of dueling weapon, where you, instead of one rapier, you now have two, and you use that to your advantage. While when you see Godinho's double sword, it's very cinematic. So if people want to make movies where people twirl around like The Witcher, actually Godinho's double sword, that's one of them, because he makes wide fluid motions, and it's more a denial of access to certain zones that he has there. So the dual sword, while the single sword, which is like the basis, is something with which you can protect yourself, and you can also attack. The dual sword is more an invitation for your enemy to kill himself on your swords. Because if he enters this area of denial, he will get cut or stabbed or worse. While other styles are often more like offensive, or more like a normal dual style, or like sword and dagger with a larger dagger to protect yourself. So that's pretty interesting. And the last weapon that he talks about is the Montante. It seems to have a bit of a special position. I also think that there's enough from the time and around there to show that the Montante is seen like the queen of all the swords. This is like the master's weapon. After you have mastered the rapier, then at the very end you have the Montante. So this survived for a long time in Spain, that as masters of other fencers, even if there was no Montante training at all, he still had the Montante, which was like the staff that he used to keep people apart or get between that. And I heard that in Spain there's still like a saying that meter el montante, so put in the Montante, means to break up a situation. And there's like, I think this should come as the last big part of his art. And he also tells you there in the beginning that there are the rules, and then after that, if you want to make like flourishes or interesting moves, and it seems that these flourishes were especially used for demonstrations, where you actually just showed your art, that only as a master were you allowed to do flourishes. This moving your sword around in cool and interesting ways is for masters only. And when you're a student, you have to keep to the original rules and use them. And only after you have understand that, you can like move on. Oh, and he has a very well hidden Montante dueling section that is hidden in one line. So, where it goes full circle again, because he said if you are faced, because the Montante is again denial of area. People come into your reach and then they die because they ran into your sword, not because you attacked them. However, if you are confronted with another Montantero, he says, in this case, don't use the following rules, because this is against several with one or doubled weapons. Against another Montantero, you go back to the single sword and use the techniques and the logic that we used there, with a caveat, use only thrusts. You can, if you wish to, like use the slashing attacks, the hues, but that is to translate it in how he tried to put it. That's like really motherfucking hard to do, and will be very, very tedious after a while, because it's a heavy weapon and you don't want to do that. So stay with there, protect yourself, use the thrust techniques from the single sword, and with that you will be safe.
Yeah,
so
makes sense.
Rapier alone first, then the double weapons in certain different situations, where he also introduces like the idea of how you can build up a zone of denial with your weapons that isn't really that much there with the single sword. Then at the end, the Montante, which has an interesting callback to the very first lessons of the Rapier itself.
Interesting. When it comes to the double sword, which I think is probably what a lot of people maybe know of or may be interested in, one question that comes to me is, are these swords meant to be used symmetrically, or is one more of a used almost like a long parrying dagger versus the strong hand with the sword?
It's more symmetrical. As I explained before, it is a bit different to many other styles where you usually have like a primary sword and then the secondary that keeps helping you. With Godinho, you use both swords at the same time, and they like often switch positions. The very first rule starts with one sword on your right above your head pointing towards your enemy, and the other sword is like on the level of your waist, and it's showing backwards, and then you slash with both. And so that you have like a chain of attack. One comes first, then comes the second. If done correctly, you can break through people like trying to block you, because you can do that with a lot of power. And at the end, you have like a mirrored position where now it's your left hand that is pointing at your enemy and it's the right hand pointing back, and you then sweep back and forth. That's what I meant when I said that the double sword is very cinematic in a way, that you see like this big and fluid movements which usually aren't used in many styles. But this is because this is not a dueling thing for one person against one. It's an area of denial thing that, again, you have to think about the compass. How far is my enemy away? And also he also uses like thrusts, and again, both hands. Also in chapter 1, that's something that I call the sewing machine, is because you do like one thrust after another, like the needle of a sewing machine. It's really fast, and it's only against one or a maximum of 2 opponents. And in that situation, it's really good and it's really effective, and it works far more symmetrical than the other styles. Now, that is also a good point.
And okay, denial of space, but then why would you not use a Montante? What's the advantage of using 2 swords? Do you have, by the way? Oh, yes, of course. But yeah, so there wouldn't have been a law against going around with 2 swords. That would have been okay.
I'm not sure, but it's probably a bit easier to hide 1 second sword. Or if you are just a bit like, you're not sure what the situation is going to be, because the Montante will always be hard to miss. If you are running around with a Montante, you are showing the entire world you've got a Montante and you are probably going to use it. But a second rapier, you can hide that. Also, depending on the situation, it's easier to get a second rapier in your hands than suddenly, like, if you're not in a computer game, it's really hard to summon your loyal steel into your hands when the situation doesn't call for it. And also, it seems to be like an own style. It's another piece in the toolkit that you have as a fighter. Although it is interesting to see that if you look at the double sword and the Montante, that they are closely related in the way you move. It might also be that using the double sword is also a way to like teach you the movement and the technique that you will later use for the Montante itself. Especially if you're not used this flowy motions that you will use later, maybe or probably it's easier to do that with two light swords than with a much bigger sword that has a completely different weight and a different behavior. And so that at least your body is already thinking and processing this wide sweeping and fluid movements before you have to fight with the sword, so that it becomes easier to use the Montante later. But that is just wild speculation.
Yeah. And we also have two comments here adding to that, which Myers made again. Maybe it's like it's how Palladini does it, where sometimes your servant carries the second sword. And then Elmar continues, and second sword is also available after you kill the first opponent. So yes, that's definitely true. This is a very interesting
simulation of how people thought that back then, probably.
It's really interesting to me because on the one hand, it feels like.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just remembered that some time ago, I think it was even Meyer's mate, the immortal Imco van Hulst. By the way, shout out to him and his perfect work on the other Meyer with all the exotic weapons. I think, and maybe him or someone else, they showed me an old picture showing a normal market scene, and there were all these people and also the gentlemen, and they all carried weapons. Maybe it was Elmar. And if you zoomed in, one of them was actually carrying two rapiers. So it might have been okay, or in certain regions, for example, be legal to carrying two rapiers, because that's like a normal weapon. And what am I going to do with two, right? So
interesting.
Sorry with the misquotation to all my fans. One of my friends was it.
I'm sure they'll be able to confirm who it was. No, one thing that I was thinking was really interesting is that it almost, what you're saying now to me almost points in two separate directions. On the one hand, there's a real use, like it's proper to think that it was a real use, in the sense that, as you say, there's a legal reason why it would be easier, and it has that like control of zone of area function. On the other hand, it almost seems like in the way you described the different chapters, you go from one sword to double weapons and then two swords, which kind of comes before the Montante in terms of being able to control the space. Like, so yeah, it's funny. On the one hand, there's practical reasons, but there also seem to be like teaching reasons or structure reasons to the book for it.
Yeah, I think that there's a pedagogical approach to this. I'm also trying to like build my knowledge by following all the schools, which is something that is what very few of us in HEMA do. We all usually like focus on that one weapon that we love, and then we kind of ignore everything that's around it, because just following this one weapon that you're really interested in, even if you take it very seriously as a hobby and have a lot of time to train, it still takes a lot of time. And so that you don't have like this entire thing. And with Godinho, I'm trying to like bring it all together, which again is incredibly slow, but there seems to be like this logic behind it. And the longer I study him and his style, is that there is like a certain logic and why he's constructing it the way it does.
One question that comes to mind is what kinds of sword does he describe or show in the double sword? Because we tend to think of rapiers as very asymmetrical swords that are usually wouldn't really adapt very well to the I just pick up a random sword from someone and use it in my left hand or right hand. So is that visually shown in a way that makes sense on the?
Sadly, he doesn't. One
Okay.
of the biggest banes of my existence with Godinho is what sword did he use? Because with 1599, we are already in a phase where the old rapiers are being replaced by the newer ones. So the cup hilt is already in existence and is already an interesting sword. However, looking both at the artworks from the time, the descriptions, and luckily into his techniques, we can assume that his own sword was not a cup hilt, but one with a more complex kind of hilt, a basket, more not a basket hilt, swept hilt.
Yeah.
And I tested the two sword things just out of necessity with all different kinds of swords and rapiers. And the interesting part is it actually works pretty well with everything rapiery. So I have one rapier that is more like an older one. I'm now finally getting a second one that is the old style. And I have a cup hilt rapier for La Verdadera Destreza, and I can use them both, and they work pretty well for the two sword style. Another friend of mine, he decided, I already have side swords. Will this work? And I thought, no, maybe your hands will disappear, and they are short. But then we tried it out, and it also works with the side sword. So that is really interesting. As long as you can hold it well in one hand and control it, and you can hold them both in both your hands without too much difficulty, then this works, especially because it creates space. You only have to get like your hand around it. So yes, if there is something very complex around there that kind of stops your hand, like gripping it correctly, that would be a problem. But so far, as I said, I'm left-handed, but even with a right-handed sword, I can get there and I can swing the rapier how I want to. And also, which is also interesting, is for the older rapiers at the very least, in the Verdadera Destreza, you have like 2 fingers on the riscasso. And for Godinho, 1 finger on the ricasso makes more sense. And you can actually work on your grip and the weapon you're holding to see which one gives you the best swish and control. So there's like a balance that you want to have. You want to control the sword well enough so that it goes there and stops where you need it to be, because if you are opening up an area, you're also opening up yourself. So you want your sword to stop where you need it to stop and then quickly move it. While on the other hand, the looser you grip the sword, you can, for example, have no fingers on the ricasso and then like whip it around. Then you have a much stronger motion, more reach, but it's less stable. And you have to find like this perfect sweet spot. And the interesting part here, at least with Godinho style, is that it actually supports a lot of different weapons that, as long as they are rapier-like, it will probably work.
Interesting. And then you mentioned the dirty tricks chapter. So do we want to talk about that a bit?
Sure.
Well, there's the famous sand, of course.
Yeah, the famous sand is actually the last chapter. And again, I think the dirty tricks and some other chapters there, you have the personality of Godinho shining through. Again, this is also an interesting bit when thinking about the translation, because I think it's is it 7 dirty tricks? The last dirty trick is the one with pocket sand, and he tells you that if you know that there are people who are going to try to murder you, and they are going to ambush you somewhere, you will stuff, wait, I'm right-handed, your left pocket. You are left-handed. yeah, but generally, I'm getting commentaries from the cheap seats. If you are a right-handed person, yes, I'm left-handed, I know, but if you're right-handed and your right pocket in your vest, you fill it with as much fine sand as you can. And then when the attack comes, you like throw the sand. And if you think that it's going to be really hard and there will be several people, you also put sand into your other pocket, into the left one. And then you keep throwing with each attack sand like it's confetti. And the funny thing is that he starts really like, this is the technique, you put the sand there, use the fineness. And by the end of this paragraph, he's already like, the tone has shifted to, and then throw them into these motherfuckers' mouths, like with no pause, just keep throwing it into their faces, bitch. The wording changes. And it's really interesting. It's really funny to see that. And there's a dry humor that he has. There is, if I may derail, we can come back to the dirty tricks later. There is one of the more advanced rules that is actually very effective and funny. And this also shows you that he's used to fighting people with swept hilts and not with cup hilts, is when someone attacks you with moves that are pretty wide open, that you have a big atajo from the right or a revés from the left, you see their hands. All that you have to do is you move the point of your sword so that it will hit their hand. That doesn't work with a cup hilt. And the way he writes it is, if someone is so stupid, just point your hilt and then you will poke their fucking hands. And if you miss that, don't worry, you're already into the swept hilt rapier, and that's already your counter. The dude is dead. You can actually like read the comedy out of it. Then and another part which is really interesting, because that is what I meant with, he doesn't only show you normal fencing, and also an interesting point would be that he knows fencing for fun and fencing against someone who's trying to murder you. And this is more in the murder category, that you got into a fight in the middle of the street. The first thing you do, of course, he says, and again, I feel that the sarcasm has started to drip out of the pages, if that idiot in front of you is that kind of asshole that would wear armor under their clothes. So he puts it like that, that there are these people, and I expect of you, of course, that your first attacks is to like check left, right, are they wearing armor? And if they are wearing armor, here are the 6 chapters, what you are going to do against this asshole. And he gets increasingly more annoyed by this virtual opponent. And in the end, it ends with one of his hardest strikes, the punta de puño, which you can like push into your enemy, or you can even throw your sword. Actually ruined a tip protector and maybe an innocent tree while trying that out. It comes out with a lot of speed and force. And at the end, he finishes as, by the way, if you are, and again, this tells us so much about the situation, if you think that this doesn't work, man, if you think that that doesn't work, you go into your hall and you do it like I described here against the wall of your saal, and then you will see how much power it has. So there's all of this character and all of this, like several levels. He is also, by the way, very interesting in that he has like 10 lessons just for left-handed people. So if you're left-handed, you will have these and those problems, but these techniques are really strong for people like you, which I haven't seen in any other book that I have personally read of. And the funny thing is, it's followed by 10 more chapters. So there's this fucking left-handed guy in front of you. If you're right-handed, these are the 10 tips that will break that. So he is very open to realistic situations, helping you as a pupil, no matter if you're the left-handed or the right-handed, what to do and how to enhance your capabilities and how to use it to your own advantage in whatever situation you might find yourself in. And yeah, that goes then back to the dirty tricks. One interesting dirty trick was if he actually again paints a picture that many men these days tend to stand in a very typical way, is that they have, instead of standing like this, they have like 1 foot forward and a bit to the right. If they're doing that, that's the perfect moment to, if you get close, to just put your leg behind them and throw them so that they fall flat. So it's like a little judo maneuver, which he actually does not have any kind of wrestling moves, but that one, if he stands like a giant peacock with his left or right foot forward, you will use that. You will just put that then and put a leg in there and shove him so that he falls to the ground. Another one, which is also really interesting, because it works very well when you do it correctly. It sounds very funny first, is if he's wearing a hat like a good gentleman, you will grab the rim of his hat and pull it over his eyes. That is very Bugs Bunny-esque. But when you read it correctly, is you won't pull it over his eyes. That will happen too. No, you're going to grab the rim of the hat and then pull with the full weight of your body and pull it down. We tried that with hat on, and that almost breaks your neck.
Because I can imagine.
Like, it pulls down, and then it pulls you here, and then because your center of gravity is falling downwards, you are going face first into the ground. This is very disorienting, and you will fall hard. That one, it starts funny but ends horrible. Or another one is that if you can't draw your sword, that you have to apologize profusely to your enemy. He's obviously right. You are a worm. You are the worst. I'm very sorry that I caused offense. And then you make like this and say, here, I could swear to the Holy Cross. This is also funny because he starts like, you could swear to the Holy Cross, but you're a good Christian, you don't. But like one trick later, he says, you swear on the Holy Cross, and may God be my witness. And when you are close enough, you poke him. And again, with 2 fingers in the eyes. And while he's distracted, you either push down his sword to draw your weapon and kill him, or you draw his sword and run him through with that. So it's interesting because there's, especially in the dirty tricks, there's so much slapstick and humor, but at the same time they are interesting and really neat techniques. Also one, if you have your sword, you can actually like pull it out and use like the cross guard and your sword like the holy sword, and then punch them with the pommel in their face. And while they are distracted, you can initiate combat. And this is interesting. Again, it shows you the situation that he's used to, the tricks that you can use there. And there's like this whole like work of art, this magnum opus, where he teaches you everything from a duel between friends and so-called black swords. So they had training swords and training equipment back then too. Over to you are out on the street and you are fearing for your life. And then it's not about causing dishonor by cutting your enemy or just by disarming him, but this is like raw survival, and you will do everything that you have to do to survive. He also has like, there's this thing like in the middle, and again this is very interesting because it shows you a lot about the time and the place and the culture there. Is if you go to a sword school that you don't know, that there's like a certain ritual, you will be very courteous. There are certain ways in how you have to present yourself and how to say hello and how to say goodbye and blah, blah, blah. But he says, especially if you notice that if you don't know him, or if you notice that your enemy is maybe a bad loser, that you will not give away your black sword until you get your sharp back, and that you will, after you get your sword, you will move backwards, keeping him in your line of sight. And then you will only let go of your black sword once you have your sharp again, and then very carefully leave, because there are people who suddenly find a new renewed energy and valor the moment that you turn your back to them and they don't like losing. So again, this again shows us the situation that there is like normal sparring as we would know it, which is also important because this is really interesting to me also on a philosophical and psychological level. The deadlier the weapon, the more good friends you need to train that in a completely safe environment, because it's so difficult to master and so important that you do it because your life is at the line, and that he knows like this completely. We are friends, we're at school, we are training our art to, we are on the street, I don't know what this guy is doing, he might murder me, to this in the middle, I just won against someone who I don't quite know, and maybe he will forget about decency and the rules. And so I'm going to be extra careful while I remove myself from the situation.
This is funny because as you're talking, it reminds me of that recent chess game that Magnus Carlsen lost, where he punched the table. Yeah, so with a chessboard, that's cool. But yeah, if you're using swords, if you lose your temper, even for a fraction of a second, that could, could be very, very dangerous.
In that situation, I would not let go of my king until Magnus has left the room.
Exactly, yes. So this is really interesting because from how you're describing Godinho's style, let's say, a lot of his humanity, let's say, and his personality seems to emerge, which honestly seems like a quite pleasant guy. In terms of language, both I think in his style of writing, and then maybe it would also be interesting to know, is his Spanish accessible to a modern Spanish speaker or reader, or is it a bit like with German or something where you need to know the old language?
Interesting. I would say that it is accessible. However, my background is my native Spanish is from Latin America, and we have held on to certain words that are not in use in Spain anymore. So it might be more difficult for a Spanish person, but in general, it's still Spanish. It's quite understandable. I, as a Spanish speaker, find it a bit easier to read Godinho's Spanish than, for example, Mayer's German, which is more or less around the same time. So maybe it's because of my background. For example, if you are a Spanish speaker, I would very much recommend that you get a commented version of Don Quixote de la Mancha, which was published in very early 1602, not quite sure, but in the first years of that. So you have someone speaking the language and the vernacular, which Cervantes is known for. And usually you have not only a commentary section that tells you about the culture, but you have a book with all these things happening, and you have all these footnotes explaining the Old Spanish. What I found also really interesting in my version, that was for, I think, the 400th anniversary, that edition from the Real Academia of Spanish, they had like a little dictionary in the back. And I thought, oh, this will really help me to find out maybe false friends or certain weird words that were used in the past and that I won't understand. And then I was reading all these explanations and I didn't understand them because they are modern Spain Spanish. And then when I read the old word, I said, why didn't you say that directly? So that was a funny discovery to make. But it is accessible. As accessible as an old source is, you are going to have more problems with his writing style and the way he puts things. But there we are again with the writers. But there I think I have certain tips for people who are interested into looking into Godinho. There is, again, from the Royal Academia, a web page that I can very much that I would recommend, because you have a lot of words that you can look up there, and they will often not only show you modern but also archaic meanings, and sometimes you will even have like words where there's like a in brackets that it's Esgrima, so it's even like a fencing word, and sometimes you will learn more about the word and its evolution and its many different ways that what it might mean, that it might be helpful, for example, if your Spanish is A, modern, and B, if your Spanish is only like mid-level like mine, because native speaker, but I've been living in Germany since I've been 2 years old. So I have the Spanish level of someone that is maybe 10 at most. Yes, that would be that part. The other thing, which is really interesting, and I think that would also help with people who are using the English translation, is what I found out is that Godinho, again, has a weirdly modern way to do things. If you look at his descriptions, because what makes him a bit unclear is that he is in a scene and tells you what person A is doing and then what person B is doing. However, he seems to sometimes switch the perspective while he's explaining, which makes it harder to understand. There's sometimes a technique, and then he describes, is it a counter? Is it something that like you do? Are you suddenly the other person? And then it swings back again. So in a way, it is very descriptive in a visual way where the camera keeps swishing around, which has the advantage that you have a lot of information in only a few lines. Makes translation horrible, makes also interpretation really hard. But again, this is also something which is why I'm taking much longer than I thought I would in the beginning, is when translating, you really have to not only have the text and get the words correct, which is really hard when you're switching languages, and it's already really hard when you stay there. It's to try out what he's talking about. This is pretty true for pretty much all of HEMA, to see if what you are envisioning in your mind is actually working. I had a few examples, both with Godinho, but also, for example, with the old German style, where I thought that, oh, this is perfectly easy. I see exactly how it's going. And then when I moved my sword, I noticed that, yeah, my enemy has also a sword there and I can't pass through it. This doesn't work at all. So language-wise, it's not that hard. But the interpretation, that's hard. If you're using the English translation, you have to be aware that the translator, for example, translated compass in a way that this entire concept vanishes. That is a bit weird and strange. But again, the English translation is very, very good. And the way they translated it, and this is also a thing about translations, is always some kind of interpretation. And if a diestro from the Verdadera Destreza translates it and he sees compass, of course it's a step.
Yeah.
While I, coming from a more outsider perspective, saw it as something a bit else, and only later learned, oh, wait, there's like this difference. And this also explained why, for example, the English translation did something there. And then on the other hand, probably the English translation has nailed a few things that, for example, in my version are weird or strange. And I hope that, again, the more people like work with this, the more people like that put out interpretations, the better our understanding will be, because there will never be, as long as we don't have a method to summon Godinho back to life, something that will truly tell us what he meant, so that we can only like puzzle it together as a team effort, which again, that is what makes HEMA interesting.
Absolutely. But well, first of all, when do you think your translation will be? So for the German speakers out there, do you have a timeline, more or less? Is it something that...
When work ate me, my timeline died a year ago. However, to the German speakers out there, if you ask me directly for something, it makes it much easier to just jump in there and do a translation. I already have like the first 20 something normal chapters translated, dual sources complete. I really need to look at Montante again to see how far I've gotten there. But for example, if people come and say, oh, there was this thing where people are in armor, can you tell me what he said there? And then instead of just reading it, I usually think, it's only 5 chapters. And then it's 7 hours later and I have to go to bed, but at least then the translation is there. So with feedback and help, it goes faster. And else it will sadly have to live with real life, which always tries to come in my way. I also need to experiment a bit more. But I really would like to push it forward again and see that I at least get something done every month, that there's something to go a bit further. And again, if there are the people that need it, that use it, and then they ask, it's easier to keep going with that, because then I know, oh, these people need that chapter, or they need help with this interpretation or that, and that will make everything go faster. And also that feedback also helps. Again, this is this thing with the translation, because I can't do a word-for-word translation. It's impossible. German and Spanish are too far away from each other, hence the impossible words. And there is always an interpretative part there. What I, for example, have changed is everything Godinho writes is most often than not indirect. And I have changed the perspective into reading, speaking to the reader themselves. So it's, if you are in this situation, do this and that, because it's easier to imagine that. And with feedback from other people, they can also help me tweak this, because it's easy to say, hey, I, this modern genius, have translated the words of this ancient master because I know better than he does what he wants to do, which is not true. I'm just doing my best. And with that kind of feedback, I can work on that. I also replaced everything that's talking about left and right to make it agnostic to the side that you are using, so that I, as a left-handed person, can actually read that book without my brain breaking, because
that is quite helpful. Yeah.
With your right hand from the right to the left, that's still easy. But then when it gets complicated, and then you have to write your own name into the forehead of your enemy to show him your dominance, that's a bit hard. So I'm trying to write it in a way that's the primary and the secondary hand. So that makes it also easier to understand, no matter which handedness you have, so that you don't have to do that translation on your own.
That's really useful. I'm left-handed too, and one of the big obstacles for me is always the mental mirroring, and it's exhausting sometimes. Also, most of what I do is actually the reading part. I don't practice as much as I would like to, so it's the worst part I get to do. But it's interesting to mention, what you mentioned now, because it's you have to choose between doing either a kind of philological work, which is perfectly translating a document from the past, versus instead creating a tool for HEMA, which it sounds to me like you are removing a few of the obstacles to make it more of it's still a translation, but it's also something that can be used a little bit more easily. One question I have, and let's see if anyone else has questions now in these last few minutes. So feel free to add them in the comments. But one I have is, do you think Godinho is important because of his role, let's say, as a underdog? Is his value that of showing a way of fencing that is not the main one, and it kind of opens our eyes to different ways of doing things? Or do you think Godinho actually has potential, true strong potential in his own fencing that we should recognize?
Both, actually. So for one, I always love my underdog and my outside. And when I hear, oh, this is a really strange style or a really strange way of doing things, I'm interested at that very moment because I ask myself, why? Why is he an outsider? What is he doing differently? And that is always for me like catnip, because I need to know. And I started looking at Godinho mostly for the Montante. Then because he was like the outsider, which made it interesting. But then with time, I noticed that he's really one of the great masters. I love his work. I love his approach to it. The way he thinks about things, all of that makes me feel very strongly about his style and his school. It's also really interesting that in a way he's a symbol for all the styles that we have lost. Because La Verdadera Destreza survived, thankfully, with a lot of books, which is really cool because you can see all these masters with all these different things. But there is an older school that was as famous as that what came afterwards. There are like 2 or 3 grandmasters from 100 years past that are known and quoted in Spanish treatises because they were so great. There was, for example, the great master Pons, who had a school in Mallorca, and where people from all of Europe, from Italy, from Spain, from Germany even, went there to train with him because he was this great grandmaster who wrote this fantastic book with lots of pictures, and that's lost. And the 2 grandmasters that came after him also lost. If we take Elmer's conspiracy theory, it probably was Pacheco. But it's really, it is a great style. It will broaden the view on what destreza and Spanish fencing can be. It is also a bit of like a bridge between the Italian styles and the Spanish ones, because there seems to be a certain closeness between the styles, which makes sense, because one thing that we keep forgetting is we imagine, oh yeah, there was like the Middle Ages or Renaissance, and then if you lived in a little town, you never moved out of it for 3 miles. There are many little towns where people still do that with cars and television. But the reality was that this was a really interconnected world. Again, thanks to Cervantes, I saw that, for example, he wrote the book, it became a big hit in 3 months, and 6 months later, you could buy Don Quixote de la Mancha in Lima, in Peru, because there are shipping manifests, and it took a bit longer, but it still got there. And when you think about what we are talking about on a geographic level, suddenly Europe is much smaller. And if you read even into the old masters, the really cool ones, the big masters that wanted to show you that they were not just some kind of provincial master. They told you they traveled through all of Europe. They learned and exchanged themselves with all the greatest masters. And now that they have come back with the true art, so that shows us that there's a lot there. And the Godinho is like one little beacon that is left of a void century that we know nothing of about the Spanish styles, or very little, a part of what is quoted. And he's like this last light of this time of where there was such a great variety in styles of these many different masters, there's many different ways, and also like the connection between Spanish style and Italian style and other styles all over. And again, he was a great teacher. I think that his method is really good. It still stands up to today. I love the way he tricks you into thinking you're the coolest. And then after 4 weeks, he points back at you into the past and tells you that you have been doing footwork for 10 hours every day for the past month. And you say, oh no, you tricked me, but now I'm really good. So yeah, there's so much there. And as you can see, I really love him. This is a very cool guy that more people should know about, not only because he's an outsider, but also an outstanding master.
Very cool. I think you painted a very, very charming picture of him, both as a person, as far as we can tell, and as a fencer. We have one more question by Sunfire Ridu again. Do you have a big unanswered question that you'd like to ask Godinho directly, if you could? One.
Can I ask you several questions, please? Would be the one question. That's a really evil question. I would have to think about what the one question would be, because I would ask him a lot of questions. If I had a one-use time machine, I would probably waste it, and instead of finding out what the lotto numbers in 2 weeks are going to be to get the jackpot, I would go back in time and ask Godinho, please be my master and teach me everything.
Yeah, understandable. Maybe not wise, but
yeah,
we have a bit of a challenge too. So Godinho would not
totally beat Rapier, sorry.
So it'll have to be tested on the field, I think. And one last compliment here by Phil Simondi, which is, yeah, Manuel's agnostic when it comes to left and right are nothing short of a blessing for us poor left-handed folks. Great call for your translation. It seems like most of the left-handed people into swords are here tonight. I think we're overrepresented, which is nice.
We are the real force.
Yes. So I think with that, I want to thank you a lot for your time and for really kind of, yeah, I think what you did really well here was bring Godinho to life. I feel like just in this couple of hours, I have a better understanding of the person as well, which is really cool. And is there anywhere people can get in touch with you, or any online resource you can suggest for Godinho enthusiasts?
I will leave my professional email so that we can put it into the description, so that people can just write me directly. My online presence, in general, I'm a bit of a hermit. That's a bit of a problem. So thank you very much for giving me this open platform and like spread the good word.
Yeah,
this. But I'm really open to everyone. If people want to ask me things, and don't worry if I'm doing the German translation, if it's in English or something like that, I would be grateful to find more people who are interested in it, and then we can contact directly. From there, I don't know, we can go to Discord or by the way, Discord, I am also like sneakily sleeping in the HEMA Discord server, so you can ask questions there, where I am Sunjumper. We can write that too, so that people can write me there or over mail, and then I can answer their questions and go in depth, because as you can see, if it's about Godinho, I will tell you a lot about that.
Yes.
And also, if you want more agnosticism about the left hand.
That I think a lot of people will enjoy for sure. Okay, so thank you again, Manuel. It was a pleasure. You're always welcome back.
Thank you.
And have a nice rest of the weekend. And thank you everyone for joining in, and I'll see you at the next time.
Yeah, bye. Thank you very much. I was honored to be here, and until the next time, maybe.
Yes.
Goodbye.